When I'm talking to anybody who's new to Ocala or new to Florida, or even just starting to think about moving to Florida, one of the first things that comes up in the conversation is hurricanes. Followed closely by alligators, but that is a whole different subject and not what we're talking about today. Today is all about hurricanes and a couple of things you might want to do in order to get ready for hurricane season. Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Frost, and this is my channel where I talk about all things real estate in the Ocala and Marion County, Florida area. And if this is your first time here, take a second to like and subscribe because I'm told I put out some pretty useful stuff every now and then, so you might just want to stick around so as not to miss anything good. Now back to hurricanes. First of all, hurricane season runs from June 1st through November 30th every year. Not that Mother Nature actually keeps a calendar, because she doesn't. A hurricane can spawn earlier or later in the season, but generally speaking, if they're going to pop up, they're usually going to pop up between those dates. So that's what they settled on for the season. Now, I've said lots of times before that we don't really get hurricanes here in Ocala, and that is actually true. I wouldn't lie to you. Hurricanes need water to grow and stay strong. And Ocala is pretty darn close to the center of the state, so no matter where any hurricane comes ashore, it's going to have to cross a good bit of land before it gets here. So by the time a hurricane gets near us, it's pretty much died down to a tropical storm kind of thing, if there's anything left at all. Which is not to say that a hurricane won't ever hit Ocala dead on. I mean, let's face it. Take a big enough hurricane with exactly the right path, and one could easily last long enough to still be a hurricane when it gets here. And actually, according to NOAA, and by the way, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, and not the fellow that built the boat, but according to NOAA, Ocala actually did take a hit from an unnamed hurricane back in 1871. But that's been what, about 153 years ago? Yeah. So even though it can happen, I'd say that the odds are definitely in our favor. Not to mention the fact that I'm not sure anybody's really 100% positive that that one was actually a hurricane when it showed up here. I could be wrong, but I don't think they were quite as good at measuring wind speeds back then. And in case you still got your doubts, Ocala is one of the safest places in Florida as far as hurricanes go. Usually number 2 or 3 on the list, but always in the top 10. Just depends on who's making the list. But regardless, you still have to be prepared just in case. Because even though it hasn't happened in basically forever, the forecasters have threatened us with it a whole bunch of times, and we've had a few close calls, so you don't want this to be the one time that you ignored it, and that the weatherman was finally right about. In the grand scheme of things, it's not really all that much trouble, and I am a big proponent of being prepared. I mean, you never know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Because the thing about hurricanes is that they kind of have a mind of their own, and nobody is ever exactly certain where they're going to hit until they actually do, which is why they call the hurricane path the cone of uncertainty. They're pretty sure the hurricane's going to wind up somewhere in the general area, but not exactly where. The closer it gets to land, the closer the estimates get, but things can still change in a heartbeat. So you always got to be prepared. And a lot of times we might go through this 2 or 3 times a year, which I'll admit gets a little tedious, but you still got to have everything ready just in case. So basic Hurricane 101. Hurricanes come in categories from 1 to 5 based on wind speed. A Category 1 storm has winds ranging from 74 to 95 miles per hour. A Category 2 storm has winds from 96 miles per hour up to 110 miles per hour. From 111 to 129 makes it a Cat 3. 130 to 156 is a Cat 4. And anything with wind speeds over 156 miles per hour is a Cat 5. And those are pretty rare. Only about 6% of all hurricanes hold together long enough to make it to Category 5. And only 5 have ever made landfall in the U.S. Now, believe it or not, the main cause of damage in a hurricane isn't usually the wind. It's the water. Water in the form of storm surge and flooding. All that wind just pushes the water onto the shore like a battering ram, causing a huge amount of flooding in areas where there might never have been flooding before. And if it happens during high tide, well, then things get even worse. Those are the ones you usually see on the news programs. All those areas on or near the coast that just get devastated by flooding and storm surge. But here in Ocala, we're not on the water, so we don't see that kind of stuff here. Here, our biggest worry is wind and secondarily the rain, or a combination of the two. Because even if it isn't a hurricane when it gets here, some of them do get close enough for us to get some of the impact in the form of some pretty nasty storms, tropical or otherwise. And even if it's just a tropical storm, High enough winds can cause some wicked damage. Loose roof shingles can fly off, or you might get some gutter damage, and relatively light stuff like lawn furniture can get blown around and cause damage all on its own. And you're pretty much guaranteed to have tree limbs coming down, and that's probably going to knock out power somewhere. Add a good bit of rain, and shallow-rooted trees can fall over because they get too heavy with rain on top, and the ground gets too soft to hold the roots on the bottom, so over they go. The longer the wind and rains last, the more likely we are to have a whole lot more widespread power outages from falling limbs and such. And Marion County does have some low-lying areas that'll flood, and some of them will stay flooded for a while until the ground dries up enough to soak up all that extra water, which is why it's important to know your flood zone when you're buying property, and also to have an agent who's pretty familiar with the area so that they know which areas are more prone to flooding when we get a lot of rain. A whole lot of new residents get an unpleasant surprise come rainy season, because either they didn't check or because their agent didn't. And just because you're not on the water doesn't mean your property isn't prone to flooding now and then. So how does one prepare for a hurricane? Well, first of all, and I can't stress this enough, don't wait until the weatherman says that a hurricane is on its way to start getting ready, because that's just going to be a big ball of stress wrapped up in a huge cloud of anxiety. I mean, yeah, we usually get 3 or 4 days notice that a storm's heading this way. But if you wait until then to do your basic prep, you're going to be running around like a chicken with your head cut off trying to get everything done. And you'll be fighting it out with all those other folks who waited till the last minute too. So it's going to be pretty hectic. Think huge lines at the gas station, raids on the water and bread aisle, and lines at the big box stores for lumber to board everything up. It is a mess, and one you're better off avoiding if at all possible. So the smart thing to do is to get your basic hurricane prep done well in advance of hurricane season. Now, by basic prep, I mean things like trimming back any dead tree branches or branches that hang out too far over your roof. If you think that you might want to have hurricane shutters or board over your windows, then you're going to want to get those shutters installed well ahead of time, because if you wait for the last minute, good luck finding anybody who can do the job. And let's face it, I mean, you'll need to decide what type of shutter works for you, and then you, or the installer, will have to measure your windows and more than likely order the shutters or materials to make them. And all that's going to take some time. And even if you do just decide on plain old plywood to board your windows up, you're going to need to measure your windows and cut the wood to fit, and then install the bolts or hangers to put it up with, so that when the time comes, you can just slap them up easy peasy. And no, I do not know a whole lot of people who actually have hurricane shutters or board up their windows here locally. But I do know a few, so it's just whatever makes you feel secure. Another good idea that you can do any time of year is to make a video record of everything in your home for insurance purposes, or even just take some pictures of everything, which is a pretty good idea regardless. That'll make things easier if you actually have to make a claim on your insurance at any point. And you'll want to make sure your insurance is up to date, because something a lot of people don't know is that once a named storm gets within a certain distance of the Florida coast, insurance companies will stop writing new policies or writing changes to any existing ones. It's called the no bind box, and it covers about 16,000 square miles. So just be aware, and don't wait until the last minute to decide you suddenly need insurance, because it ain't going to happen. And before you say anything, you have to realize that insurance companies started doing that because I'm told that a whole lot of people used to do exactly that. If they owned the home outright, a lot of people would just self-insure and not buy an insurance policy. And then every time a storm would get close, they'd run out and buy insurance. Then after the storm passed, they'd cancel again. It didn't take awfully long for insurance companies to catch on to what they were doing, and so, boom, now we have the no bind box. This is also why if you're buying a home here in Florida during hurricane season especially, we agents will strongly encourage you to get your insurance bound sooner rather than later. Because if you're financing your home, you can't close without insurance. And even if that storm is just skirting up the coast, once it's in the bind box, you will not be able to get insurance, which would delay your closing and, depending on the situation, could cause havoc for everybody involved. And havoc is not a good thing. And if you want a whole home generator in case the power goes out, you're probably going to want to get that bought and installed early too. For one thing, they usually need to be ordered, and they always require an electrician for installation. So again, not a last-minute kind of deal. And even if you only want a portable generator, it's probably a good idea to buy it earlier rather than later, because not only will you have a better selection to choose from, some models might also need to be shipped, which takes time. Now, those are just some of the more basic things you might want to do in order to get ready for hurricane season here in Florida. the pregame items, so to speak. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's still a lot of other stuff you'll probably want to have on hand. So come back next week when I'll go over all the other stuff that you might want to have ready for hurricane season. And I'll also give you a great tip for how to save some money while doing it. So until then, take care, and I'll see you soon.